everybody. I am going to read Tyrannosaurus Drip. In a swamp beside a river, where the land was thick with veg, lived a herd of duck-billed dinosaurs who roamed the water's edge. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds. Now, across the rushy river on a hill the other side lived mean Tyrannosaurus with his grim and grisly bride. And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with the war. They shouted up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. But the two Tyrannosaurs, so grisly and mean, couldn't catch the duck-billed dinosaurs because they couldn't swim. And they muttered, "Down with the war!" And they muttered, "Down with the wet!" And they muttered, "What a shame that bridges aren't invented yet." Now little Compassaurus, but for short we'll call her Comp, found a duck-billed egg and stole it from a nest beside the swamp. And she swam with it, and she ran with it, and muttered, "Clever me!" And what the baby Comps be thrilled with the duck-billed egg for a tea. She dropped the egg in terror and went running for her life from the mean Tyrannosaurus and his grim and grisly wife. And the duck-billed egg went rolling, and at last it came to the rest in, of all unlucky places, the Tyrannosaurus' nest. Now Mother T had great big jaws and greater, more enormous legs, but her brain was rather little, and she couldn't count her eggs. And she sang, "Hatch out my terrors with your scaly little tails, your spiky little toothless, and your scary little nails." Out hatched baby 1 and 2, as perfect as could be, but Mother T was horrified by baby number 3. And she grumbled, "He looks weedy," and she grumbled, "He looks weak," and she grumbled, "What long arms, and look, his mouth is like a beak." "He just needs feeding up," said Dad, and he gave the baby some meat. The first 2 gulped and guzzled, but the third refused to eat. He said, "I'm really sorry," and he said, "I simply can't," and he said, "This meat looks horrible. I'll rather eat a plant." "A plant?" yelled Mom in horror, and Dad said, "Get a grip." His sisters found a name for him, Tyrannosaurus Drip, and they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with the war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. Poor Tyrannosaurus Drip tried hard to sing along, but the others yelled, "You silly Drip, you've got all the words wrong." For he hooted down with hunting, and he hooted down with the war, and he hooted down with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. Drip's sisters soon grew big enough to hunt with Mom and Dad, but they turned on Drip and told him, "You're not fierce enough to come." And he cried, "They've gone with me." And he cried, "Alacte." And he cried, "This doesn't feel like home. I'm going to run away." He ran off to the river, where he saw a lovely sight, a herd of duck-billed dinosaurs hooting with delight. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds. As he stood there on the bank, a sudden urge to hold him, and he jumped in the water, and he discovered he could swim. And the duck-bills came to greet him by the rushy river's edge. And they hooted, "Nice to see you," and they hooted, "Have some veg." And Drip, who was delighted that they hadn't run away, ate bellyfuls of water reeds and played with them all day. Then he gazed into the river. and asked them, who is that creature in the water? And they laughed and said, it's you. That night, lightning crackled, a storm blew down a tree. It fell across the river, and the tees cried out, yippee! And they shouted, up with hunting, and they shouted, up with the war, and they shouted, up with bellyfuls of duckbill dinosaurs. Drip's sister stepped on the bridge, but then began to frown. For in front of them stood Drip, who yelled, look out, look down! And they looked into the water, and each let out a yelp. And one cried, water monsters, and the other cried, help! The mother scolded, nonsense. She looked into the water and explained, good gracious me! The three of them stood trembling, and Dad said, get a grip. You're all as drippy as Tyrannosaurus Drip. He strode to the bridge and scuffled, I bet there's nothing there, and he looked into the water. Then he jumped into the air. And how the duckbills hooted when he landed with a crash, and the bridge broke. And 4 Tyrannosaurus went splash, spluttering and clinging to the branches of the tree. They went whooshing down a waterfall and all the way to sea. And duckbills hooted happily. They hooted hip, hip, hip. Hooray for the heroic one and only duckbill Drip. The end. See you in my next videos. Bye.